Hello, everyone. So this is a new friend. I haven't introduced you to a new friend in quite a long time. This is Debsy, everyone.
So my dog narrates a story. Of course, she wrote it entirely by herself of how she and I became family. And it is a book that we are going to give to foster kids. We want to sell it to regular people and give it to foster kids. And Beth will put the link to my website if you'd like to follow our journey about Lucy, Search for a Forever Home, a rescue dog's true story.
Oh, that's beautiful. And you did foster for a little bit too, as well, didn't you?
Yes. Yes, I did have a foster kid.
As a single woman, that's kind of significant. Well done, you.
Yeah. I missed a lot of work while I had that kid.
See, that's why I love Debsy, because she tells it like it is. All right. So we are in Luke 19, verse 28 through 2270 today.
Okay.
And I have something right out of the gate in 1930. Basically, this is Jesus talking. Go into the village over there. He tells it, but it's so funny to me. And then later on in this particular section that we're going to read, also talks about Jesus telling him where they're going to celebrate the Passover, and he gives them these random weird instructions. I mean, not weird, but if you're with someone, and obviously Jesus is fully man and fully God, but he says stuff like this where it's like, oh yeah, go take this person's donkey, and you're thinking to yourself, like, as a disciple, I'm not going to steal it. And then he sort of explains, he's not stealing it, he's needing it, and whatever. It's funny to me because it's sort of random, like, hey Peter, go fish and then you'll find a coin for the temple tax. And only God could be that intentionally random, in my opinion. So I just found it funny. So I just put a little squiggle through it.
Yeah, and I think we like to say that, we're not supposed to have any fear of man, and I think this is such a good example. Like, they were supposed to just go out and obey and not get all caught up in their head about, "Somebody gonna think I'm stealing their donkey? Like, this is really weird. Why is he asking me to do that?" And that's how we're supposed to obey. Just do what he says and trust that it's all gonna work out.
Yeah.
And, there's probably some more story that we don't see in the Gospels of these people spending the rest of their lives telling their friends and family about their donkey.
How their donkey was ridden by Christ. Yeah. Yeah.
Right,
In the
right.
triumphal procession. Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't ever thought of that way. That's a very good insight, Debsy. So my next note is on verse 38. This is a quotation, and it actually echoes Psalm 118:26. I've been doing a bunch of deep diving on text and where it comes from and which lineages of texts, and totally geeking out on stuff, which is really sort of ridiculous. I have been a little bit obsessed lately with the Septuagint, which is the Greek copy of the Bible and the Old Testament, New Testament. And so there's all this discussion, what was Jesus speaking? Was he speaking Aramaic? And then there's questions about what Hebrew it was, whether the Hebrew had probably disappeared by the time of the exile into Babylon, and that only Moses and his generations had spoken it, original Hebrew. So it's all very confusing, but the Septuagint is a Greek translation. What have you got in Luke 19?
Just as there's all of this noise. Like, to even film this, you'd have to have so many, like, actors because of all of the action that's going on in the scene. And then here the Pharisees are like, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." That's like me going in the middle of a footy match and being like, "Hey, can you get your, like, 5 people to shut up? Like, there's 10,000 people here, but yeah, get your 5 people in line."
They're his disciples, so he's the leader, and there is a relationship between a rabbi and his students. Rabbi isn't going around usually by himself. He's got this entourage with him. But it is funny because it's the scribes and Pharisees sort of yelling at, saying, tell them to do this. Well, if they kept quiet, the stones along the road would burst into cheers. This is NLT, what I'm reading today, which is a little bit more of the modern vernacular.
Right?
And I do love, of course, you've got Jesus clears the temple is the header in this section, and this is in 45 and 46. The scriptures declare, my temple will be a house of prayer, but you have turned it into a den of thieves. And I actually relatively recently have read the directions in that's talking about where if you live too far away from the temple, you can change your money. And so take the money from the perfect lamb and take that and bring that to the temple. But they took it so far. They took it to the point of where it didn't matter if you lived in Jericho right near Jerusalem and you brought your lamb, they would still have you change it at the temple, supposedly. At least that's what we understand from archaeological stuff, which again takes the letter of the law so far from the spirit of it.
Mhm. Yeah. And this is a turning point. This is the beginning of the end for Christ. This is when these all guys, the Pharisees and Sadducees have kind of had an axe to grind with him for a long time, but now they're just like, we're going for his head. They're this is when they decide we're taking extreme measures.
Yeah, absolutely. And the famous quote from Caiaphas, where one man should die for the whole of everyone. I don't think that's in Luke, though. I'm moving on to 20, and I'm in verse 2 through 8. The Pharisees they ask a question of, by whose authority are you doing this? And Jesus is clever. He is intelligent. And he says, let me ask you a question first. And then he asks, and then they kind of are like, oh, if we say this, then that. And if we say that, then this. And so then they don't have an answer because they don't want to be seen to be caught out. Just like you talked about earlier a minute ago, when Jesus asks you to do something, you don't start second guessing it and people pleasing and saying, well, what if this and what if that? And I don't know about this. You just go do what he says. And these guys are like, well, if we say this, then people will think that. And then that's where Jesus answers them and says, all right, then I'm not answering you. If you are not answering my question, I'm not answering your question, which is really clever.
We've all been in those conversations where it's like, this is just a waste of my time. You're just your motives are not right. Just move on.
Yeah. And I loved later on in 23, it says he saw through their trickery. And this is just like you just said a minute ago, they're coming for his head. They are done. The Pharisees and scribes are done with Jesus, and they are using anything they possibly can. And I think I talked about this with Jill. They accuse him of saying that that you shouldn't pay taxes, which is, he never said that. He said, render unto Caesar's what is Caesar's. And yet they're twisting these words and trying anything they can, because how do you accuse an innocent man? You lie. So,
Right. Is this about paying taxes? Or is he saying, that coin has the image of Caesar on it, so it belongs to Caesar, but you are the image of God and you belong to God.
amen.
I mean, it kind of works both ways.
Yes, absolutely. But it's very clear as we go along, as we're getting closer and closer to Christ's crucifixion and him being arrested, the Pharisees and scribes, it just ratchets up, it goes up a notch until they are ready to kill him. I do love the whole conversation about resurrection and the Sadducees. The Sadducees don't believe in resurrection, and it is an interesting topic, and the way he handles it, again, super clever. Marriage is for people here on earth, which we have these images, I think, I know I do. Heaven is talked about, and it's supposed to be this place with gold roads and amazing. And there's all these words associated to it in terms of modern religious views of other things like nirvana, or there's a Buddhist one. Can't remember the name of that. Agartha. Anyway, if you're trying to describe something perfect, some place perfect, you lose a little bit of vocabulary. And yet I think in the Bible, actually, it tells us a lot more what heaven is really like, and yet we miss it because we have these modern visions in our head of, oh, this is going to be just breathtaking and yet not real, I guess is how I think of it.
Well, and I think we like things like the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus is spending like chapters discussing this, but there's a lot in the Bible about heaven. It's just a verse here and a verse there. And unless you take the time to really dig in and look for it, you're not going to have the correct. I mean, I don't know if any of us will ever have the correct view of it until we actually see it. But I did a study on it. And one of the things that shocked me was just that we're going to work in heaven, which to me, it's like work is the most cursed thing in the world, but work literally is cursed. And once that curse is removed, we were made to do this. We were made to have a purpose. We were made to build and do things. And really, eternity is a long time. We need to be doing something.
Yeah.
But then it just is the question of what are we going to be doing? You know, are we going to be like the cosmic whale trainer, or, it says we're going to rule and reign with him. Well, who are we ruling and reigning over? That's kind
Right.
of a big question.
Well, and there's no sea, so what happens to the whales? So, but yes,
Does
there's.
it say there's no sea?
I thought it did somewhere.
I think it does. I think there's a question about mountains because I think it says it'll be all leveled.
Hmm.
And also a question
I
about
live in
night.
Colorado. That's kind of important.
Yeah,
And you used to live in Colorado.
I know. And those are above up mountains.
Right. Well, and I do think that we have this idea, and hopefully anybody listening, we've had an experience of where you've been able to go to a beach on a sea and sit in the beautiful sunshine and enjoy the fresh water, salt or otherwise, and relax. And you just mentioned a second ago that the idea that we would work in heaven, and too often we have an idea of work that is hard physical labor, horrible toil that you have no release from. And that's not to say that even in the idea of a workout of someone going and physically exerting their body, because we will have bodies in heaven, that isn't a good feeling when you've run somewhere or chased after someone or run after the dog or something, or the dog runs down the beach, and it's a beautiful thing. And so we have a bad image of work, like you said, that it was cursed because we have to toil with the ground. And I think that's the hard part to remove in terms of our perceptions of it.
Yeah. And I mean, like, this book is definitely something I feel called by God to write. And I don't really feel like it's work because I feel like his favor's been on it from the beginning. And so even learning how to build a website wasn't huge. And I mean, it should be insurmountable for me, but I did it.
You did indeed. So, in terms of Luke, I have a lot highlighted here. I have the obviously the next parable here noted is the widow's offering and the two small coins. I always remember it being called a mite, and yet my notes in this particular Bible say lepta. I was like, okay. But the point being that we should be giving out of our abundance, and what that looks like, I think is really hard for people because we fight so hard working to try to maintain our stuff. And I think it was Audrey I was saying, like, if I had to actually wash clothes in the stream, I think I'd be a little in trouble because I don't know that I could do that very well. You've done an amazing job of that most recently in terms of getting a camper. And how long have you been living in your camper now? About 9 months?
It's August.
Okay. Yeah. Which is a really small space and a lot of travel and a lot of adjustment.
Well, washing your clothes in the stream really might not be that bad because that would be your job. You wouldn't be going to the office and then going home and washing your clothes at the stream. And it would probably be a community thing because you'd be doing it with your cousin and your sister, and it would just a totally different way of life.
Yes, definitely. And I think it's amazing that we can pick up our cell phones and be able to leave a message for someone in another country and they can hear it. And that, having lived overseas for as long as I did, is an amazing blessing. And those pieces of modern technology are awesome. You can be in Georgia and I can be in Colorado and we can record this and it's great. But some of the stuff with how, especially some of the AI tech and the smart stuff, I don't know how people have Ring doorbells. I know it's good to know who's coming to your house, but I don't want to tell people about that. And I'm not judging you if you do have Ring doorbell. I can see where it could be helpful. But it's like we live on this cutting edge of what is reasonable and fellowship and the wonderful portion of what technology can bring versus the hard side edge of where you're behind a screen and you're not actually connecting with people.
Right. Back to the widow's mite. What I love about this is that she is voluntarily putting herself into dependence upon God.
Hmm. Well said. Yeah. And do you think she's doing it out of obligation or because Christ focuses on her and says, look at this, because she's not necessarily, this is my tithe, this is what I have to do. I think she's doing it because she wants to, that she's trying to give her best to God.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's probably a bit of both. Like, this is what I was taught to do, and I want to do it because I'm grateful.
Yeah, I'm gonna go into verse 25 of chapter 21, and you and I can talk about this. And there will be strange signs in the sun, moon, and stars. And here on earth, the nations will be in turmoil, perplexed by the roaring seas and strange tides. People will be terrified at what they see coming upon the earth, for the powers in the heavens will be shaken. Then everyone will see the Son of Man coming on a cloud with power and great glory. So when all these things begin to happen, stand and look up, for your salvation is near. These are straight up Little Season verses for me. They tell you what is going to happen. This was not an earthquake. This was the earthquake of all earthquakes. Jason Jack's theory about Pangea, and that the continents actually moved at this point in time, that it was that significant. And Jesus isn't a liar. He didn't say, I'll see it in 2,000 years. That alone tells me that he did return in that lifetime, and that Caiaphas was alive. Now, those are other things that we bring into Little Season eschatology, and you could go back and watch a couple of the episodes with Miles are pretty much focused on that. But what do you think of this, Debs?
Well, I decided to do a little thinking into this and research, and I was just wondering, like, okay, so Jesus warned them. Where were the disciples when this happened? And my search said that they were all off doing their missionary work. And I thought that is just such an amazing example of, there are times when God is calling us into something new and we're supposed to leave behind the past. And they could have easily been overwhelmed by what was going on in the political world, what was going to happen to that temple. Most of these guys spent their entire life going to that temple and worshiping God there. And yet maybe some of them did get it and say, no, we don't want to be there when that happens. But I think mainly they were focused on this is what we're supposed to do. God has called us to go out and do this other thing and not worry about what is going on in the rest of the world. So the temple was destroyed in AD 70, and Paul's house arrest was from 60 to 62. So he was definitely to meet Caesar and all that stuff. But the other one I looked up was Pompey was buried in 63 AD. So that kind of goes with the like that's a volcano.
It was the first volcanoes ever, Pompeii was. And again, I would always encourage people to dig into Gunnar Heinsohn's work. I'll put some links to that below. It's amazing. We don't know what time we're in and what happened when. And yet, at the same time, the word of God is true and not Jesus lying. He's saying he's come back.
Yeah, and I did a bunch of research into Atlantis for a story I was writing. And there are all these scientists, and these are legit scientists who know what they're doing and not, people with some sort of an agenda. And they're like, oh, yeah, the governments are totally hiding stuff from us. There was definitely something that happened here. And I couldn't help but wonder if a lot of the science stuff was the enemy trying to give reason for proof that the flood happened. Like, this is geological proof that the flood happened. Satan wants to make up some sort of proof to disprove the proof that the flood happened. And there's just so many places we see that in science. Mitochondrial DNA shows that we all come from one woman.
Right?
Google mitochondrial DNA and you're going to find a whole bunch of reasons why that doesn't exist. Yeah, but it does.
Yeah. Well, and perfect segue there, Debsy. We are into Luke 22:3. Then Satan entered into Judas Iscariot. One of the reason I underlined that, obviously, we know the story. He's the bad guy. Okay. Was he up until that point? And obviously, the foreknowledge of God, God knowing what we would do, knowing human nature, knowing all the things, and how much he told Christ as he was going along in the ministry and what would happen to him, because he knew that the Son of Man would be crucified and rise again 3 days later. And he tells the disciples this. But I wonder, the first time that he met Judas, like at that point, Satan hadn't entered in, because it says it happens here. And I'm not glorifying Judas in any way, shape, or form. He obviously opened himself up to Satan entering him and did betray Christ. But I think the point of that is that we have a choice to make. We as humans have a choice to make. We need to either choose Jesus or not.
Yeah. And I think God would have provided Judas an escape had he chosen to take it.
Yeah.
You don't have to do this. There is another way, but he did it anyway. So, I like to think about, what was it like for Jesus to be at that last supper, at that last Passover feast, knowing that you're sitting there with somebody who's going to betray you, sitting there with somebody who's going to deny you. And yet we see that John is resting his head on his chest. So it was an intimate time of friendship and community in spite of all of this other stuff. And I mean, I think I probably would have wanted to stand up and stamp my foot and say, "Look, I'm about to suffer like no man has ever suffered. Would you guys quit up with your petty
Right?
nonsense?"
Yeah. They begin to argue among themselves about who's the greatest.
You know,
Appropriate, guys. Yeah.
and he ends up there sharing this meal with Judas, but at the same time, he's also the same Jesus who was hanging on the cross saying, like, "Forgive all these people for putting me on this cross," and pitying them.
Yeah. We are weak as humans, very weak, and have such little capacity for that kind of emotional empathy and compassion. The crowds came and he had compassion on them. He is such, Christ emulates the Father in that manner, quite significantly, in my opinion.
Right.
All right. Well, we should probably trek over to Judges, but I have to mention 2250, and one of them struck the high priest's slave, slashing off his right ear. Man, Peter, dude, action man, right? What is he gonna do? That's what he's gonna do. And then here's the perfect part about this, and this is in the Synoptic Gospels, so this is talked about. But I think this is the only place that it talks about. It says, "But Jesus said, 'No more of this,' and he touched the man's ear and healed him." That servant of the high priest that has to have been kind of significant for him, and yet they drag Christ away. But this has just happened to you. A guy attacked you with a sword, cut your ear off, and then Christ heals you. And you must have been like, what? And then he's going through these motions of bringing Christ in and whatnot, that his brain had to have been like, I don't know what's going on, because that had to have been significant for him. I just think so anyway.
Yeah. I also do want to go back and talk about real quick. Jesus foretells Peter's denial. "Behold, Satan demanded to have you, that he might sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail." And he is praying for us, and he is praying when we don't know what to pray. Peter didn't have a clue at that point, but Jesus was already praying for him and providing in that way.
Yeah. Well, and the three-time denial with the three-time restoration. And I highlighted in 22 verse 36, I literally highlighted the words, "but now." Why did I do that? What is the significance of "but now"? Whereas he has said just before that, he's saying, "I told you not to take any money, not to take any clothes, not to do anything." And yet things are about to change significantly. We are in time, God is outside of time. And yet here he says, "But now, so go ahead and take your money and a traveler's bag. And if you don't have a sword, sell your, like, actually defend yourself." Like, this is, so I don't think he's saying go into the world like some skippy, happy go lucky little sheep that, oh, well, I'm going to get slaughtered. Okay, no big deal. He's actually saying be wise, be ready. And I think that that's important because of the fact that we're post crucifixion. And in my opinion, post return, there's a different way to be.
Well, and maybe they had learned to trust and that he was trustworthy. So now that you know how to rely on me, meet me in it and be kind of prepared.
Yeah, I love that.
We'll do this together.
That's the good nuggets that you bring, my dear. All right, moving over. I did find it amusing that Debsy, I said, "Hey, can you do a week?" And you said sure. And I just picked one for you. And what do we have but Deborah, which we'll get to in a second because there's quite a few judges here. I went through numbering them, and I don't get to the first one until Othniel in chapter 3. But in chapter 1, I underlined, it says 27, the tribe of Manasseh failed to drive out. Verse 29, the tribe of Ephraim failed to drive out. Verse 30, the tribe of Zebulun failed to drive out. 31, the tribe of Asher failed to drive out. And that's only 4 tribes of 12. And Judah does go first, and that's the first moment here in Judges. But God said that he wouldn't drive the other nations. He wouldn't annihilate the other nations immediately because wild animals would have come and it would have been a little bit too much for them, which again is God giving you what you can receive at that point in time, which is amazing to me. But it is sort of ironic that they couldn't accomplish the task.
Well, and if you're going to be trusted to care for God's nation, aren't you going to be kind of building up some strength and fighting for it? And not to mention that sense of belonging that would come. Like, if you fought for it, if you built a house, you're going to care for it more than if you rent an apartment. And
Good
so,
analogy.
yes, they did get to move in. I mean, they were already blessed with that. Like, you get to move in and eat food that you didn't plant and live in houses that you didn't build. But golly, you can do something. You can clear the giants. But, and not to skip ahead to Deborah, because it's not all about Deborah, but over and over, they are stopped by what? Iron chariots. Like, they get stopped even though they have had win after win after win, 40 years. They're like, "Oh, man, these guys have iron chariots. We can't do this."
Yeah.
Really? You can't?
But
Because the sun stood still. The sun stood still. And you're scared of an iron chariot.
right. Well, and that's just it. That became their new giant. There were Anakim. They drove out giants. Most of them had been annihilated. Obviously, David still kills Goliath. We'll get there. But for the most part, Og and his 15-foot bed, he's dead. And so they have driven out some of the giants, but then the iron chariots become their new giant because they're afraid of iron chariots.
I wonder what they did with that bed. I bet it would have made a good altar.
Well, it was displayed somewhere, wasn't it? Was
I
it?
don't remember.
Yeah, I thought it was. But anyway, so we have Othniel in chapter 3. And then we have Ehud, the left-handed man. And then I have to, because I said this to Dave when Eli falls over and dies in the previous section, don't be fat. We have 322. The dagger went so deep that the handle disappeared beneath the king's fat. So again, don't be fat. And I'm not talking about like a little bit of pudge that all of us have. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, obviously, he was kind of a significant thing. And then we have, and I want to know, this is part of when we get to heaven, these are some of my questions. Verse 331. After Ehud, Shagmar, son of Anath, rescued Israel. He once killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad. Can I get some more details on that? Can I like have a little bit more picture? Shamgar. Who was his mother? Which tribe did he came from? He was son of Anath, but where was he from? Like I got one verse. And you get to heaven and you're like, "Oh, hi. Who are you?" "Well, I'm Shamgar." "Who?" Right? Because we don't remember this. It's kind of funny.
Mhm.
And so, Deborah, here we go. Chapter 4.
All right. I got so much to say about Deborah, but I don't know how much to even bother with.
What do you mean? It's a lot. It's good. It's a good story.
Right. Well, the name is important too.
Yes.
The name is Deborah means bee, and it comes from Debar, which means word of the Lord, as in like a grouping of words. So, as in not like one word of the Lord, like as in a speech or something. And so she's a prophetess. So, word of the Lord, I mean, that totally connects right there.
Mm.
And bee connects because bees are about order. And
Manuka
she was
honey is one of the most amazing things on the planet, healing wise.
and she was in this community. Like, it was kind of her community. I arise as the mother of Israel. And so, I mean, there's that image of the bee too. But if you really want to push my buttons, you tell me she's married to Lapidoth, because I don't agree with that in the least bit. She's not married to Lapidoth, because in Hebrew, the word they're using for wife can mean, wait for it, girl or woman. And Lapidoth is a feminine word for torch.
Okay. But it's, I mean, our English translations here say Deborah, the wife of Lapidoth, but you're saying that that's not correct? What would you translate that as?
I think it means Deborah was fiery.
I love it. I love it. Okay.
There are some rabbis who say it means that she made wicks for the temple, but I think that's reading into it. I think we don't know if she was married or not. And there are some that think she was married to Barak, which is conceivable, more conceivable to me than Lapidoth, because again, it's a feminine word that means torch. This is not modern day America where we're just going to pick like, oh, we're going to name our child Apple. Hi, my name's Gwyneth Paltrow and this is my daughter Apple. No, they weren't doing that in Hebrew. So names meant something.
Okay, that's an interesting one. I'm surprised by this. I hadn't occurred. Like, it just, to me, it's just kind of okay. She's married. That's her husband's name. Whatever. It wasn't a significant part of the story. It doesn't have to do with what her actions are. And this really is the ultimate woman's power story, if you will, in the most appropriate way. She is the prophetess. She is the judge that is leading Israel. And because Barak is hesitant, it's JL that gets the glory. And so it is kind of, the whole story is telling you, hey, women have a role here and they deliver.
Well, yeah, yeah. And they stopped the iron chariots that stopped all the other tribes.
Yeah.
Well, it stopped their tribe too, but it all,
Yeah.
so it was a woman, not even a warrior. It was a woman who stopped the iron chariots.
Yeah.
Trying to see what else I have here.
Well, I love in 5:7 until Deborah arose as a mother for Israel. And I wonder, one of the things that it talks about, Samuel is a little mad when the Israelites ask for a king. And then we get Saul. And we've just recently read the book of Ruth and how we get David's grandpa. And yet, how were the judges chosen? It doesn't say, it just says, like I read with Shamgar, after Ehud, Shamgar rescued Israel. How did that come about? Did Deborah decide one day, oh, you know what? I'm going to sit by the palm tree. Like, what? It came about naturally, organically, in that when the Israelites are oppressed, they call out to God and God sends them a judge. Now, sends, what does that mean? Like, did the judge come in a chariot from the sky? No, like the person arose. And as we'll get there, Gideon, an angel comes to him. That's the next story, and tells him what to do. But and his character is slightly questionable later on. Obviously, he rescues Israel with the 300 men and whatnot. But God anoints the judge to do the judging and calls them into it and picks a person to do that. And that's what happens with Deborah, but it's so organic.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the time though, it probably has something to do with Deborah. She probably knew a thing or two about the law. And we see that in some of the other judges. I think maybe it was Gideon. I can't remember. I probably have it in my notes. But some of them do have like a knowledge of scripture and have probably taken some effort to learn it. And one of the things that is just puzzling about this whole passage is that Joshua dies. There's no leader. Where are the priests?
Yeah.
Where is the line? And I even asked Grok this, but Grok points out that there wasn't a pastor, there wasn't a pope, there wasn't a leader. They were supposed to, this was Grok, they were supposed to like learn to let God lead them. And that needed to be done on an individual basis. Which is just, it is very interesting because you can't read this book and not realize that a leader would have been great. And so many times they needed one. Yet, I mean, there's just not even really a spiritual guide in most cases. And maybe that's why Deborah was sitting under the palm tree, giving advice, probably more than judging.
Well, and it says there was no leader in Israel in those days, but God raised up the judges. And this is the whole thing. It's like God wanted to be their leader, and yet they can't even manage to follow the law, follow what is given, follow the general guidance that was laid down by Moses and Joshua. And they can't figure out how to do that. They go astray. And it irks God and he gets mad, and then he lets some other nation run over them. And then they cry out and go, oops, sorry about that. And you think, dude, come on, get get it together. And it is only through these judges that they do. And then eventually they say, which makes sense as to why they would even ask for a king in the first place.
Well, and when you look at the promised land and what God said about it, they didn't need to do anything except collect the honey and the milk. All they had to do was obey. If you obey and worship me, I will guarantee your harvest.
Yeah.
I will give you peace. All they needed to do was, oh yeah, wait, that's what they were told to do. Get rid of the idols
Hmm.
and not associate with the people who caused them idols. So because they just messed up from the beginning, and God told them this is what's going to happen if you don't do this. And yet we see over and over and over that it happens. And so there probably was something organic with certain people, but recognizing this is the way it's supposed to work.
So with Gideon, the one thing I want to point out is the fleece. There's a whole thing there with his sons and Shechem and all that jazz. I'm going to kind of blow by that. And I love how Gideon's response is, hey, don't be mad at me, God. Can we do it one more time? Can I just double check? And God's not mad at but it's his posture. His posture isn't, we'll prove it, God. His posture is, oh, I'm a little insecure. Can you help me by doing it one more time, the opposite way? And I love that.
As far as like what you're saying about Gideon, like even before the fleece, there was just so much proof that he needed to do this. Like we just need to go out and obey. But God was patient. And when you look at him and he's like, well, I'm from the least of the tribes of these. So it's not too terribly, incomprehensible that he needs a little bit more encouragement. And he's saying, I'm from the least. And God's like, no, you're a mighty man of valor. I've renamed you. Believe your name.
Yeah. Well, and names are important. And then we have some more judges that nobody's ever heard of. And then Jephthah. And I think I'm going to skip Debsy and I talking about this, but it's one of those humdingers in the Bible where you go, what? Okay, moving on because it's so weird. But I'll just leave that. Obviously, if you've listened this week, you've heard the story. It's one to dig into, definitely. And then we get into Judges 12, where we have Ibzan, and then we have Elon, and then we have Abdon, and then we're into Samson. So again, there's all these judges where I want more details. I want the story. Can I hear some more? Kind of funny.
Right.
And you and I were talking about this the other day, actually. Samson's mom, is she named because she's the wife of Manoah or the mom of Samson? Like she doesn't actually get a name, which is really funny to me. It's like poor girl didn't even get a name.
Well, and obviously God sent an angel to talk to her, so God thought she was worthwhile.
Right?
But whoever wrote this out didn't seem to think her name was worth mentioning.
It's sort of weird.
Yeah.
One of the things that I love about Samson, I didn't have too terribly much underlined here in this section, and he judged Israel for 20 years. That's the very last line that we read this week. But with Samson, we always we're taught, again, little Bible stories as you go through life, even if you weren't raised in church, maybe you went with a friend to VBS or something like this. And we've heard these in popular culture, Samson and Delilah. And yet Delilah is not, his first love is a totally different woman. And his parents are saying, hey, this is not an Israelite. Maybe don't do this. And he's like, nope, I'm stuck. And it says that God was planning something with this, with his love of this Philistine woman. And then, and he kind of, he goes about hoeing a bit before he meets Delilah. And Delilah is a hoe. But it's just sort of, we always think of Samson with Delilah as this insane love story. And yet he was obsessed with her eventually, but after he'd had his heart broke quite a few times.
Well, and you think about who is a famous Nazarite is Samuel. And Samuel had some sort of tutelage. He grew up in the actual temple. But you read Samson's story and you're like, did you have a clue? Did you think being a Nazarite was just not having alcohol and cutting your hair? Because there's a bit more to serving God, like, yeah, not demanding a Philistine wife. Like, there's just so many things that he misses. And his parents just seem to indulge him, which may be like, oh, well, you were the one promised by an angel. He definitely seems to be indulged. He didn't even know he wasn't supposed to eat the honey out of the carcass of the dead lion.
What do you mean wasn't supposed to eat it?
You don't touch a dead thing. If you're not supposed to touch a dead thing, you're not supposed to take honey out of them and eat
Interesting.
honey out of a dead thing. It was unclean
Good point. Hadn't thought about that.
in a culture where you are really not supposed to. Like, there's a whole ritual for cleansing
Right.
if you come into contact with something dead.
Good stuff. And obviously, the line where it says that Samson killed more Philistines in his death than he did ever in his lifetime is the interesting one. It is the last. His hair starts to grow back and he asks God for strength. And you get the impression that the amazing strength that was given to Samson was almost too much for him to handle. Like that he didn't quite know how to go about life with this amazing strength where he could have hurt anyone, done anything. And just like when the men come to take him and he agrees to it and he says, "You're binding me, but you're not going to try to attack me," because he doesn't want to hurt his brothers, his fellow Israelites. But it's an interesting one for me because I don't think he could grapple well with the strength.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like he, out of all people, needed some anger management. Yeah. And I don't know what verse it is, but one of my favorite things from this story is there is a verse that says, Holy Spirit came upon Samson and he killed 30 men. That's what I get from this story, is that God is sometimes messy. And you know why? Because he chooses to use us and he chooses to use imperfect people. But the whole fact that Holy Spirit came upon Samson and killed 30 men, like, you can't expect God to be neat and tidy, and you can't be offended if you don't like the way he did things. You just have to trust that God knew those 30 men, and it was just time to go. There was there was more to it than that. I mean, it's just, we would love to think that God would never do something like that.
Well,
We would love to think that Jesus would never cast a bunch of demons into some pigs, and those poor pigs.
yeah, that's a great segue. In Judges 1, this is in verse 17. Then Judah joined with Simeon to fight against the Canaanites living in Zappath. And they completely destroyed the town. So the town was named Horman. But the completely destroyed in this particular Bible, like I said, this week I've got NLT with me. The word is haram, and it does mean to annihilate, completely destroy. So, of course, as with my love for Sassy, talks about hamstringing the horses, and I'm like, oh, poor horse, right? But this is God's judgment on a nation, a place, and it means everything. It means don't keep the plunder, don't keep the spoil, and this is what got Saul into trouble. Don't even keep the good, beautiful horse that you think is amazing. You need to absolutely cleanse out what could be a stumbling block to you in the future. And they don't. In this particular case, like this town was killed, but in general.
You can't say that without mentioning Haman, because Haman's whole line was supposed to be wiped out, and Saul didn't do that. Obviously, he escaped because he's Haman the Agagite,
Yeah. Someone from his line
and
kept.
yeah, and Samuel does kill the king, but obviously some people didn't get wiped out, and then a few hundred years later, they're had a pretty darn good plan in place to wipe out all of God's people. So that's the thing. You have to understand, like, yes, it sounds horrible that God said to do this, but God knew what was going to come of that.
Yeah. But even, and this is the redemptive story, even in spite of our screw ups, in spite of the Israelite screw ups, in spite of going astray, in spite of not quite doing exactly what Christ has commanded you to do, there is grace. There is redemption. There is, and that is the truth of the story, is that we have a savior and we can be saved from ourselves, from our own nature, from the fact that we are born of sin. We can have the grace and the sacrifice of Jesus' blood applied to us and get off scot-free.
Yeah, and the New Testament also teaches us that God doesn't want even one to perish. So, I mean, you kind of have to balance that out with his nature, and understand, like, there's a mystery to God, and we have to accept that mystery, and that we don't understand everything, and not, again, to not be offended if we don't like his ways, but to trust that his ways are good because that's what his nature is.
Amen. What a perfect way to end. Well, thank you, Debsy. I'm glad you joined us, and all the best with your book launch. If somebody has a foster kid or is in the foster system and wants to get a hold of your book, they can go to your website.
Well, follow the journey. It's not in print yet, but debsdaniels.com.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you, my dear.
Alrighty.